How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to the Fantasy Assessment. My name is Rahul, and I'm here as always since two Thursdays ago. But as always, with Jerry Wilkie and Chu Russell. How you doing, Jerry?
What's going on? Glad to be doing another one of these again. This is our third week in a row, actually, because we were on Jeff's show last week. So
We were all on Jeff's show, Armchair Fantasy, last Wednesday, and so if you were there last week, you'll probably be here because you heard the fantasy assessment enough times. But Chu, how you doing today?
I'm ready to play the fantasy assessment drinking game again. So let's see if we can mention it 13 times and see how I make it through.
Yeah, I don't think any of us will be leaving after this episode. But yeah, we're here with the Fantasy Assessment, your one-stop shop for dynasty advice tailored to your rosters. We're here to help you win championships, and whether that's you got the winningness of win now teams, or you're a rebuilder with no assets to your name, we'll help you get to those championships. Today's theme is we're going to be talking about free agency. March Madness did just start today officially, but for Dynasty, maybe that was 2 Mondays ago when all of a sudden every running back in the league seemed to move teams. For 10 minutes there, we were thinking about a Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones duo at the Packers. And then no, Jones was cut by the Packers and now it's on the Vikings. So free agency has been crazy. So we're going to be talking about how we look at the impacts from the past, week and a half and assess where our dynasty rosters stand from the news. We're going to take all of you here today through a team that has several players, your Ecklers, your Pollards, who were affected by the free agency period, and break down what we would do in that position. But first, we'll start with a little segment of Choose Your Fighter. This is where we have a topic of the week, and each of us picks our best candidate to win the competition for us. So this week's topic is the player whose value moved the most in free agency, and that could be good or bad. There are a lot of players whose values shot up the rankings, and equally a good number of players who fell down. So Chu, who's your fighter for this week?
So I'm going to start with a Pittsburgh Steeler, but not the one that I think most people would be thinking of. There's been plenty of movement with that team thus far, free agency, trading, that sort of thing. I'm going to go with George Pickens. Of course, I am a Carolina Panthers fan, so I know Deontay Johnson is hopefully going to be the one that's going to save that offense. But George Pickens is now left in Pittsburgh as the really sole target getter outside of, I would say, Pat Freiermuth. I don't think Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson are going to put up much of a fight. I do expect them to probably draft a rookie, probably day 2 or so. They are a wide receiver factory in terms of being able to draft and develop wide receivers. But this is George Pickens' wide receiver room right now. He's going to be going into his 3rd year. He just came off a 100-plus target season, finally cracked 1,000 yards. And that some of that was with Deontay Johnson out and injured. And even with the, whatever you want to call it, the skeleton of Kenny Pickett, whatever capability you think was in his arm, it's gone. Thank goodness. You've got Russell Wilson, who I assume is going to be the starter. You do have Justin Fields, if he is possibly going to win the job, but George Pickens is stepping into running that wide receiver room. Russell Wilson, I trust that offense, and a top 15 finish PPR wise is not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I really like that shout. I especially like the fit of George Pickens with Russell Wilson. We saw Courtland Sutton have the dirtiest, sneakiest wide receiver 2 season of all time, but he got there with Russell Wilson. So I think George Pickens will be right up his alley, as well as being a much better player. But what about you, Jerry? Whose value do you think moved the most during free agency?
I had a couple in mind, but I think I'm going to go with the chalk, and it's got to be Kirk Cousins, right? He's going into a situation where, he might have had Justin Jefferson for the past couple of years, number 1 wide receiver, but he's going to a much better situation as far as like what weapons are around him now. Drake London, they brought in Darnell Mooney. I don't think Rondell Moore was traded to the Falcons when we were on last, so Rondell Moore's a new acquisition for them too. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts. I mean, we just named a bunch of guys that have had fantasy relevancy the past couple years together, outside of the rookies. And just overall, I mean, I was thinking about going with somebody else because for the most part, with all those weapons, and we've seen Kirk be a wide receiver one, it's not like he could really go any higher. He could he could score more points and be closer to the wide receiver one, I guess. But that's why I was kind of iffy on picking him. But I mean, I couldn't not pick him because there is so many options there. As long as he stays healthy and he's coming into the season healthy, hopefully, and all of his weapons stay healthy, he should have a top 5 season potential to be. I can't really put him at QB1 overall because he doesn't have the rushing upside, but maybe we see 35 touchdowns, limits his interceptions, and just gets everybody involved in Atlanta.
Yeah, I really like that shout. I think collectively, the Falcons is probably the answer to the question. I mean, all the weapons on that team have gotten such a shot in the arm, not just from Kirk Cousins, obviously, but also the departure of Arthur Smith. Just want to say a quick hi to Jeff and Jamie in the chat. Zamir White from Jeff. It's a pretty good shout. That'll be interesting to see what people think with Madison going there as well. Could it mean they, don't bring in a high pedigree running back in this draft class if one such exists? But Zamir White is a good shout. My guy, you did mention him there a little earlier, Chew, is Justin Fields. And I think this is the player who took the biggest downswing in value for sure. Last year was a end of the first round startup pick. And even this year, depending on where you're looking on Twitter, there are people advocating buying him for a first, still drafting him the second or third round of startups. Some people, maybe the wiser, were advocating just sell, whatever you can get. But Justin Fields, obviously a lot of talent, well suited for the fantasy game. Does seem like he is clearly slated to be the backup behind Russell Wilson. Half of that's dictated by the draft capital that they actually got for him, a 6th round pick, conditionally could be a 4th. Maybe he'll get a chance. And for that reason, I could give up a late 2025 second. What about you guys? Like, Chew, would you give up the 208 in this year's draft for Justin Fields?
Honestly, with Superflex, I know that quarterback depth is tremendously important. But he's a tricky one because he is a younger quarterback. So you're not trading for the guy that for a fact is starting this year, maybe next year, and then he's kind of just a bridge. He's the guy that Russell Wilson's not necessarily a bridge. I think there's trust in him to be able to step in and be their quarterback, not just this year, but the year after, and so to speak. So, I don't know that they have much incentive to get him in there to play. Again, if anything, if Russell Wilson just absolutely crumbles, they're like, whatever, let's start Fields. It'll end up being more than 51% of the time, and it becomes a 4th. That's fine. But I don't know there's much of any incentive to start him day one again, unless Russell Wilson just crumbles. So I'd be hesitant to probably trade anything more than say a pair of thirds or maybe a future second and a third from this year. But I don't know if it's who I'd want to invest in right now.
Yeah. No, I totally hear you there. Hard to say. If the audience could know who's the winner of this week's Choose Your Fighter, that would be much appreciated. But here we move on to the main part of the episode, and that is going through how the free agency period has affected values across the dynasty landscape. They're individual players, but are there wider spread trends that we should be watching out for? For example, veteran running backs, are they suddenly the move? If you can get them for an early to mid second. But there's a lot that's happened, and we're here to help think through how you'd assess moving forward with your individual dynasty rosters, whatever the players you may have. So, yeah, Jerry, what have you thought just generally about all the moves that have happened? Are there some trends you're picking up on? Are you trying to buy rookie picks, sell rookie picks that may or may not be related. But yeah, how do you feel about free agency so far?
And it definitely seems like it's been one of the more crazy free agency seasons that we've seen a lot of movement, and like just every time a move has been made, it's kind of slowed down a little bit now, but every time a move was made from the start of free agency till now, I've been checking out my rosters and seeing like how that affects not necessarily my roster, but like how that affects that player and like where I got to go. Like say Calvin Ridley, if I had Hopkins on that same team, that kind of sucks, you know? So I'm trying to look at things like that and see if I need to move, if I need to move a player, if Eckler and Brian Robinson are now on the same team, something like that. So I'm not necessarily trying to get rid of them, but that's like the first place I'm looking is, oh, no, I don't want 2 wide receivers from the same team, or I don't want 2 running backs from the same team. I'm not a fan of handcuffs either. So as we continue this series, it's probably come up a bunch of times. I don't like handcuffing my own players. I'll handcuff other people's running backs. So if I did have an Eckler and a Brian Robinson, I might be trying to move one of them personally. But I know other people like keeping the same running backs on the same team. But that's kind of what I've been looking at as far as this free agency went.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Chu? How are you like reacting to all the info coming in? I'm not sure how many leagues you guys play in. I keep it at a relatively trim 3 dynasty leagues at the moment, so not too many. But for the people with many leagues, how are you taking in the news and then assessing what that means for your dynasty teams?
Yeah, so I'm not in a tremendous number either. I think I added a couple this offseason actually. So I'm in 7 now. 6?
Yeah.
6 or 7, I don't know. But so really keeping track of, it's jumping from I started on Flea Flicker, so I'm going from Flea Flicker going over to Sleeper. I might have another app on there too. So
we don't like Flea Flicker here.
dude, I love some Flea Flicker. But it's one of those where it's like, if you've played on it, from the beginning, it's like this is what I'm used to. But in terms of just kind of double checking on those rosters, once you have really more than 1 or more than 2, you may sincerely forget who you have, and you have different targets for different teams. So going back and checking the rosters just to see, but I mean, a couple of guys that, one was mentioned here already, Zamir White, a couple other ones, and Darnell Mooney, Quentin Johnston, Jerry Jeudy. There's these guys that, they have some, it's either name value in a Jerry Jeudy or Quentin Johnston, for better or for worse on Johnston. Zamir White finishing the season strong, and the thought was there's no way they're going to give him this backfield, and sure enough, he's got the runway. Darnell Mooney is someone who almost immediately fell out of favor as the very brief wide receiver 1 in Chicago, but now he's going to, like was talked about very recently, Kirk Cousins. He's going to be a weapon at Kirk Cousins, and I mean even KJ Osborne had relevance in Minnesota. So there's these guys that have these quick little bumps. And before you hit rookie drafts, these are guys that I would consider selling if you can for a premium. But again, it's not that I dislike any of these guys. It's just whenever you have any sort of narrative you can use, nothing based on stats, try to sell on that if you can possibly get someone to pay into the frenzy.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you there. I mean, the examples you brought up, I think one that someone was trying to peddle their wares to me today is Hollywood Brown, who's gone to the shiniest, sexiest spot in town for a receiver. It's also, I think, obviously we've talked about the running backs, but it's been an interesting crop of receivers that have changed teams because there's no A-listers, but Deontay, Ridley, Hollywood Brown, they're not nobodies. Like, a couple of years ago, I remember Juju Smith-Schuster moved to the Chiefs, and there was some, buzz about him, but Juju had kind of already fallen out of favor at that point. But some of these names are legitimate players who have had proven production. At least Deontay and Ridley have had wide receiver 1 seasons in the past. So there's a lot to assess, and I especially like how you also touched on a KJ Osborne. What does that mean if you have just a player who might not have meant anything on your team? Can you add him, in lieu of like a third to package it and get that? So there's a lot to assess. Jerry, at this point, are you really looking at how free agency is affected the other teams in your league? Are you, scrolling through managers like maybe, contender last year on the decline now? Have you been doing some of that, planning trade offers?
Not yet. I mean, I really don't get too much into trading until close to draft time. The only thing I really have looked at was the same situations that I was looking at for me. Like, does this guy that have Deontay Johnson, does he also have Adam Thielen? Bad example because I don't know who's trading for Thielen right now, but like just something like that. If a guy was on the move, if they have another player from that team that was affected in free agencies, trying to see maybe I can get him on the cheap, but I'm not really aggressively sending out offers yet. Maybe close to draft time where we could add some picks in there. Because I also hate like the last 2 rounds of my draft too. I only want to draft in rounds 1, 2, and 3. So I'll throw my 4s and 5s into any deal just to not draft anymore.
Yeah. I'm not in any 5-round leagues at least, so I know there's some degenerates out there. Jeff in the chat was just saying his Keenan trade was Keenan and the 212 for the 204 and a 25 third. I really like that move. I think maybe the top 15, 16 picks in this draft are going to be, pretty tasty players at this point. But yeah, I mean, I know Jerry said he waits till close to the draft, but a lot of people are itching to make moves. And one such team is the subject of today's episode. This is submitted by Jack Wayne, friend of the show. Thank you very much for your submission. So let me just pull this guy up here so we can all take a look. But this is a 10-team half PPR super flex league, pretty standard otherwise. 6 teams make the playoffs, just to keep that in mind. Yeah, thank you there, Jerry. But that is a team. So no 2024 first, all other picks, the 206, 306, etc., and then all 25 picks. And per the owner, team was assembled trying to win now, but stacking up skill position players, especially younger ones in those players. So Chu, what do you think about this team? Can you take me, through some of the assets and just what are your general thoughts on this team?
So the first thing I see, just kind of understanding the league type and size and everything to understand what's maybe more of a premium or not. I mean, 10 team, 9 starters, and it's super flex. So you do want to have a couple of those, depth is important in any league, but it's a little less important here if you can get lucky. It is relatively shallow. And I know, like you'd mentioned, it's actually 6 teams making the playoffs instead of say 4. So that's definitely notable. If you can kind of limp in, but you have a good team that maybe had some bad luck earlier in the season, you can still kind of limp in and time things right with injuries and that sort of thing. So, the main thing that I'm seeing with this team, I know was mentioned, say would like to compete, but does have some younger players. I mean, the building blocks I'm seeing are Stroud, Jonathan Taylor, a couple of receivers there with Waddle and Rice.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, just had to point out Stroud there on the IR. It wasn't just Derek Carr and Nick Mullins.
Yeah.
Go on, Chu.
Okay. And I mean, there's a couple of those older receivers and then a couple of the older running backs. But the biggest thing I see, I did not notice that there was a tight end premium. So the biggest thing I'm seeing is one of those guys. I actually have a league where I had Ferguson and Schultz, ended up moving Ferguson and somewhat upgrading my quarterback position. But I do think moving one of those two, maybe paired with, say, Carr, and leveling up that second quarterback position, I think that's going to kind of help provide stability to the rest of the roster, because there are some good pieces at the running back and wide receiver position, but I don't think there's enough top tier guys that can help carry the load if the second quarterback's not doing enough for you. So I think if you're getting another kind of stepping a level up from Carr and Darnold, no offense, that you can kind of provide some stability and for sure be making the playoffs, and certainly hopefully going further than just that.
Yeah. No, I definitely hear you there, both on the kind of your assessment of how to play this league and this team as well. Like you mentioned, few players that values definitely moved around. Maybe not at all. We can get into that. but are on this team include Pollard, Eckler, DeAndre Hopkins, you know, Thielen, target hog last year at the Panthers. Now Deontay's there. Darnold, who you touched on, will he start week 1? Will he start, week 17? Those are two different questions. Even Drew Lock, I think, for me, is a sneaky mover in free agency behind Daniel Jones, who of course is also coming off an ACL tear, and maybe they draft a quarterback, maybe they don't, but Schultz as well, as you just you were talking about Schultz there. So there are some pieces whose values got moved alongside some core assets. Jerry, how are you looking at some of these pieces? Tell me about the running backs. Pollard and Eckler last season probably considered key starters for the team, maybe not by the end of the year, but how are you looking at those two players in particular?
I'd be trying to move both of them. I'm personally not a fan of Pollard, and Eckler just kind of went to a more of a replacement position as opposed to just going in there and getting the kind of workload that he was getting in LA, because they do still have Brian Robinson, but they lost Antonio Gibson. So, and Eckler kind of does the kind of stuff that Gibson does, but better, I guess. But I would definitely, whether it's via trade or in the draft, running back is going to be one of my main focuses, on top of quarterback too, because it's not really strong at quarterback outside of CJ Stroud and maybe another year of Carr, who also might be on thin ice. But my initial thoughts on the team overall was it's probably middle of the road, but being a 10-team league, maybe it definitely needs some help, because there's going to be some teams out there in this league that have, because there's really not like a bona fide stud on the team. Like there's not anybody on this team that I would probably draft in the first round in a 10-team startup right now, outside of what we know about Stroud, and maybe towards the end of the round, possibly Taylor, but I don't know if I'm there with Taylor anymore. And I'm sure this league isn't a startup from this year, so yeah, it does make sense that he doesn't have any of those guys, like, because he probably drafted Diggs at his peak in Buffalo, or he probably drafted Jonathan Taylor early with Indy. But it definitely needs some help. Taylor is a good building piece. Pollard, he's paid a decent amount out there in Tennessee. Obviously, they don't have Derrick Henry anymore. And Tyjae Spears, everybody had a lot of hype about him. That's probably going to be put on hold for a little bit while Pollard is there. For the most part, they're probably just going to split touches as opposed to Tyjae just taking over out of the gate. But it needs some work in the running back room.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you there. A lot of good points that you brought up, and actually just want to highlight this comment by Jamie in the chat. I'm willing to overpay for studs in a start 8 or 9 roster. Like Chu was saying too, you kind of just need those elite hammers, at that point when there's only 90 starters week on week. Related to that is what Jerry brought up. There's a lack of, high round startup pick guys in this team after Stroud, and arguably in a 10-team, quarterback's a little less important if you're not, the Jalen Hurts or the Lamars who can get that 25 points per game. Everyone has maybe 3 quarterbacks on average, so that does drag down every quarterback a little bit. But honing in a little more on this team, talk to me about Pollard, Chu. How do you see, what are you projecting for him in the next year? How do you see the split with him and Tyjae? And buy, sell. If you're selling, what would you look to sell for?
Well, the unfortunate thing with Pollard is, I know he finished last season on, I wouldn't say a tear, but certainly kind of picking up a little bit there after a pretty tough start. He was, of course, coming off of an injury from the prior season, so I think it was to be expected somewhat. But going from Dallas over to Tennessee, and honestly, independent of Tyjae Spears, being behind Will Levis, that offense is not, again, I understand they added some weapons, including himself and Calvin Ridley, but that offense, I don't really see it humming necessarily. I don't really see him getting the runway, so to speak, to be able to kind of eat the way he did in Dallas. And I do like that, between he and Tajay Spears, they're not really complements to one another necessarily. So I do think that's good that he can hopefully lead the backfield and Tajay will be more of spelling for him. But my concern is, we saw Pollard get a chance to do it 1 year as the guy in Dallas. And maybe it's just like a mind game, but seeing Pollard step in for the guy who left in Derrick Henry, just a god of a human being, it's kind of tough to imagine who's going to step in there and not replicate that role, but like kind of control the backfield the way Derrick Henry did. And I don't think anyone really can. So I don't really trust Pollard to do, anything tremendous. If you can find somebody who just believes in he's the guy in Tennessee, and just because he's the best running back there, that he's just going to get enough work. I think that'd be good to move off of him. And in terms of the tough thing when you're trying to look at this team and say, are you going to compete now? Or are you going to try and build? A couple of the guys that I would want to move, like a Pollard, Eckler, if you could, D Hop, it's these older guys where it's like, is it worth moving them? Is it worth maybe moving like a Rashee Rice and pairing him with another player to, again, get a true stud at one of those positions, maybe a stud wide receiver? So it's tricky, but I would say at least Pollard specifically, if you can sell him, I would, but it probably would have to be pairing him with another player on your roster to truly step and level up another position.
Yeah, I do see the thinking behind that, especially in this kind of format, and considering the return you could get on Pollard alone. I mean, Jerry, what about you on Pollard?
I just wanted to add that, like, if you're looking to sell Pollard, I think the best time to do it is around the real NFL draft, because where Tennessee drafts, they're in a prime position to take the top left tackle in this draft, unless like LA does it. But just you could use it as a selling point, even though O linemen aren't in fantasy, they're a huge part of why running backs and stuff do good. So just try to. I mean, I'm not the kind of guy that really likes talking my league mates into a trade, because that makes it seem like I'm a cheesy car salesman or whatever. But like, try to play off of, hey man, they just got Joe Alt. They should improve. That should improve the line here. See what they could see if that helps move the needle a little bit.
Yeah, and to that end too, in free agency, which we're of course talking about, they did beef up the line as well. And they did bring in the coach Callahan, O-line, from the Browns. I apologize. My actual NFL knowledge is pretty non-existent, but fantasy, I'm here at the fantasy assessment. I think you could paint a pretty convincing picture on Tennessee taking a step forward. My kind of qualm with Pollard is, I think, Chu, you mentioned a little bit there about how he's not really a complimentary back to Tajay Spears. If they had brought in a Zach Moss or a Gus Edwards, your bruising type of backs that could absorb just 16 carries a game and get the goal line work, that would have been interesting to consider Tajay from. But now it's almost Pollard versus Tajay for the exact same role. Maybe Tajay can win that, but it's interesting on both of them. But I would agree that it's kind of stocked down. Chu, what are you thinking about the other older RB in here, Austin Eckler? How do you feel after his move to Washington?
I don't know what they're doing in Washington, as just a broad answer, first of all. But getting into that specifically, Kingsbury, I don't know what to make of what this offense is going to look like, partially because of Kingsbury and partially because of who they've added at this point. And, for Eckler, I know after the signing, a couple of days after, there's some rumbling saying that I expected it to be a committee to some level, but talking about it would be Eckler's backfield and maybe Brian Robinson would kind of be like the 1B. I don't know how that's possible. I do believe that Eckler is, hopefully, a healthy offseason can get back to at least closer to his former self. But again, I know the big thing that shows up is the clip showing how slow he was, talking about his speed on the field, that one play last year. That could be injury related, and it could be he could have, get healthy, get pick that back up a little bit, but he's not who he used to be, but that's also entirely okay. It doesn't mean he needs to be the bell cow guy. And again, he's thrived off of not being the bell cow guy. Brian Robinson can take absolute abuse, but he also dishes it out. He is they much like we were talking about Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler complement one another tremendously well. So I think it's really just trying to see what offense they're going to be running there because I mean Sam Howell led the league in pass attempts last year, I'm pretty sure. And, much to, not his avail because, the number of losses, him ended up losing the job, then getting it back and that sort of thing. So in terms of wins, it didn't necessarily pan out, but Eckler will be a useful PPR fantasy back, but more as a kind of depth flex play. I don't necessarily think he'll have near this, the floor that he has had for the last half decade, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, the best of Austin Eckler came with 20 touchdown seasons and a monster, a haul of targets and catches, if you will, on a high-powered offense attached to Justin Herbert. Now he's going to a situation where we're likely going to get a rookie quarterback. Brian Robinson is better than anyone Eckler's played with since Melvin Gordon. Probably. I know Joshua Kelly, sold a lot of dreams after week one their last season, but now playing with a rookie quarterback offense, the scheme might be great. We don't know how potent it's going to be. Both Drake May and Jaden Daniels, I think they're going to do a lot of running in the red zone. We talk a lot about Jaden Daniels is scrambling, and rightfully so. Drake May runs a lot. I might even run more in the red zone than Daniels. He's got a little more size on him. So I am fading Austin Eckler a bit as well. Jerry, if you were to sell him, what would you be looking to get in a trade? Or kind of, what we were going on before, would you look to package him with another piece to move on to a different asset?
I'd probably, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely looking to move him. And one of the main reasons was because of the potential that Jalen Daniels might be there. Or, so it's one of those things where I'm probably looking at moving him before the actual NFL draft, and that way we don't see that if it's May or Daniels that's drafted. Maybe you're just maybe trying to sell a dream there. I'd be looking at the top tier teams in the league and trying to see. I mean, definitely want some picks back and just trying to see if I could get something for him. I mean, you're not going to get. I don't know if you're even going to get a full season out of him. The contract is only 2 years, I believe he signed for. And I know it's not the same offense. It's not even the same offensive coordinator, but it's like we've already seen Brian Robinson with a pass catching back in the backfield in Antonio Gibson. And I mean, we're having a hard time figuring out, like, I know we all want to keep our Terry McLaurins. We all want to keep our Jahan Dotsons, but it's like this offense isn't going to really produce that much fantasy relevancy. So it's like I'm picking McLaurin over all of them. I'm picking Brian Robinson for the rushing upside over all of them, and then just trying to get rid of Eckler while I can before an injury makes me get rid of him for nothing.
Yeah. I mean, that was a really good point you've raised about the Commanders' offense, and you can, make these kind of narratives. You never want to sound cheesy when you're selling, of course, but you can make, tailor the narrative to get the value that you need to. Quite a good question from Jamie here. What kind of opportunity load would you be projecting for Eckler, Chu? This sounds pretty reasonable. 12 opportunities a game, but what do you think?
I'm saying 7 to 8 carries and 4 to 5 targets. Brian Robinson was not necessarily a slouch as a pass catcher, although I know that that's not necessarily his strength. And they, if they could divide and conquer, and Austin Eckler comes in, he of course is a competent runner as well, but he is much more, say, competent as a pass catcher. So I would think they maybe even limit his carries a little bit more than that, maybe closer to like 5, but have his target steady. And of course, in pass pro, he is a smaller back, but he is still competent in that as well. So have him as the third down guy to work in passing situations, both as a blocker, but as a receiver. I think he's going to be, probably more better for NFL in terms of if you're going to have a rookie quarterback, you want a running back in there that can pick up a blitz and also can kind of, steady veteran presence that can help kind of be the outlet for that rookie quarterback as he's learning.
Yeah, he could be a great NFL signing. Maybe not production wise, but he really doesn't need to do too much to make an impact. The kind of profile he is, and I'm sure as a locker room guy, I know that cliches thrown around a lot, but Ekeler, loves fantasy football. He's all on a lot of podcasts. He seems like a great guy. So it could be good for new quarterback. But to get very specific, would you, for example, Jerry, would you sell Ekeler for the 210 in this league? So I guess that would be a 208 and 12 team. Would you do that for like a later second?
Personally, I mean, that's a good value, but when I make a move, I like getting maybe something with like upside back or an additional piece too. So like I wouldn't just do it one for one. And I know like that might be the reason why I don't do many trades in my leagues, but like I'm always looking to build on top of an original offer. So if you're offering me 210 for Ekeler straight up, I'm probably saying no, but I'll be in your DMs, and I might look at like, I might look at somebody like KJ Osborne as well. It's like, I mean, nobody likes where he went to, but he does have opportunity in New England. So I might say, why don't you throw in KJ Osborne? Let me have him on my bench and see if he becomes something with whatever rookie they get, or maybe he works his way into the starting lineup, or maybe he ends up being the one, but I'll take that chance too. So like I'll take the pick and the player that maybe you might end up cutting when you're getting ready to do your rookies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that kind of thinking. What about you, Chu? Question here from Jamie. Marvin Mims or Austin Ekeler?
Well, I know it's cross positional, so I know it's tough to apples and oranges there, but I would say in terms of just the liquidity of it, I would have to go Mims. I know he kind of flamed out a bit last year, but I think it's certainly important to remember not every rookie wide receiver does what we want them to do. And I think now, I know that there does seem to be a bit of dysfunction in the Denver organization. That it probably is the least shocking statement that's been made today on this podcast. But the hope would be, Sutton is still there. Tim Patrick may or may not be healthy. Again, looking back to how good his 2021 season was, and then there's just nothing since then after freak injuries. But I think at a minimum, he's going to get an opportunity. And with how messed up their cap situation is, again, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't say draft another rookie to come in and compete. But the hope would be he's getting some reps and he maybe can flash here and there to where his value will sustain. But again, like Jerry mentioned for Ekeler, if we don't even get a full season out of this guy, the floor is just going to drop out. And I think that's the biggest concern when you're acquiring someone. It's what can I do if this doesn't quite work out? And I think there's more bad scenarios for Ekeler than there are for Mims, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Arguably, we've seen a few second-year receivers start to bottom out in their dynasty value. People are kind of catching on to those benchmarks for year one, year two production. Sky Moore, was unfortunately too high on last year is an example of that. But I agree with your point, especially about the liquidity. Maybe they're the same value right now, but what I like about holding on to Mims is that more teams in my league are likely to want Mims from me rather than Ekeler, which maybe only a select 2 or 3 teams are really interested in, which is something that you need to think about, obviously, when you're sending out these offers. The guy who earned the 101 last year probably doesn't want to buy Pollard and Ekeler from you. So you need to tailor make those offers. And yeah, good point there. Jerry throwing in is that if you play on a if a league return yards, then yeah, definitely smash that Mims guy there side there. Chuba Hubbard or Ekeler, I think, I don't know, Chu, I'll let you get to this in a sec, but I would easily go with Chuba Hubbard side there.
Oh yeah, lockstep. I don't want to speak too much on it and then just sound like a homer, but it is a new regime in Carolina, but I do trust how Rashad White was used last year. Again, efficiency kind of waned on the ground, but Dave Canales even spoke kind of throughout the year. The rushing attack got better, and he talked about that being an emphasis in terms of the rushing attack, getting the ball out of his quarterback's hands quickly. So regardless of how, I guess effective in yards per carry and that sort of thing Hubbard's going to be, I think he's a sturdy back who can operate very, very well in that offense. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. Great moves done for the offensive line as well. So yeah, I'd definitely be smashing the Chuba Hubbard side there. Moving back to this team, Jerry, are there any other pieces you want to highlight as ones whose values you'd be looking at a little bit differently after free agency? Let me just pull up the team here again. Some of the veteran receivers we touched on. There's D-Hop, Thielen. Interesting QB moves. I think, honestly, Jimmy G, Jameis, Darnold, Drew Lock all changed teams this offseason. We know how many QB injuries there were. Any other players you'd want to assess a little bit differently now?
Well, like you mentioned, it wasn't a tight end premium league, but I think Ferguson definitely has gone up in value by quite a bit. They lost Gallup, who really wasn't kind of in his way anyways, coming off the injury a couple of years ago, and then just bringing in Cooks, kind of bringing down Gallup's confidence and all that stuff. But so they lost Gallup and they lost Pollard. We've already talked about Pollard. I think that Ferguson is, and we're kind of getting towards the end of the Travis Kelce is the dominant tight end that you want, and then everybody else kind of just mix in there. I think Ferguson, he's not going to be at that Travis Kelce level that we've seen or Gronkowski level that we've seen, but he's going to start mixing into being a consistent top 8, top 10 tight end, and you're going to be able to play him every week. So you could either use that to sell him off and get something, because Dalton Schultz just re-upped for, what was it, 4 years, was it?
I think
3 years. So
4, yeah.
Personally, I think I'd rather keep Schultz or keep Ferguson and try to sell Schultz, but you have more going for you if you try to sell Ferguson with the moves that they've made. Schultz, you might have a little bit of a downgrade because of bringing in Joe Mixon and still having Nico Collins and Tank Dell there, and I think they brought in another wide receiver too, didn't they? I don't remember.
They re-signed Noah Brown.
And they're still, I mean, they're even still rumored to maybe use their first round pick on a wide receiver too. A lot of mocks have seen that. So Schultz might be the guy that I try to sell, but Ferguson is the one that I think you're going to get more return for.
Yeah. A good point about the tight ends, which you often, I may have done gloss over them, especially non-tight end premium leagues. But I mean, Ferguson especially is a guy that you're going to be completely fine throwing in there week to week. What about you, Chu? Any other names from this team that you're looking at a little bit differently after free agency?
I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of them. I think the one that sticks out to me the most that we've touched on a little bit was Rashee Rice. So I don't necessarily think that Hollywood Brown coming in is just wiping away Rice's value. But again, like was talked about with Kelce, if he's kind of fading out, then, Rice is going to hopefully rise. But he's the main one that I kind of think, with this team being old at so many positions, having, the Eckler, Pollard a bit older, Hopkins, Thielen, OBJ, again, who is not even quite on a team yet. I think Rice is going to be, outside of the tight ends, one of the younger guys I'd be comfortable moving if I had to maybe pair him with another less liquid piece to level up. Because otherwise, again, I know it's trying to figure out, do I keep these younger guys in build? Do I compete now? You don't want to, you're kind of at that in between where I feel pretty confident you're probably going to make the playoffs because it's 6 teams, but this almost makes it a bit more deceiving in that, you never want to be 5th or 6th in a 10-team league necessarily. You want to kind of be working towards one end or the other. And, without having your first this season, you have some good pieces here, but again, want to really get the studs there. So yeah, Rice is the one that kind of sticks out for me outside of the older guys.
Yeah, that makes sense. I I see where you're going though, because if we relate it back to some of the older pieces, you're not getting much for Pollard, you're not getting much for Eckler. Who do you add on? I mean, Jerry, would you sell Rashee Rice? Would you make? What do you think? Rashee Rice and Pollard. What does that get you? Does that get you Drake London, perhaps from the right team? What avenues are you going? Are you trying to put that into a cornerstone receiver? Are you trying to, QB2 is a little shaky on this team. Which direction are you trying to?
I mean, if it got me London, I think I would do that. I wouldn't want to trade away Rice, but if I could get London for Rice and Eckler, that's the way I would go. I would look and see, because obviously this team only has Taylor, Eckler, and Pollard, and if you're shipping Eckler away, I'd probably try to bring somebody else back. And I don't necessarily know who. There's been a lot of RB movement so far this year. Plus there's another 6 or 7 that we're going to see in the draft that everybody's going to be all hyped on, and we all have our favorites and think that each one is going to potentially take over whatever team they get drafted to midway through the season. But I would definitely be looking at if it's London straight up, I would do that. Or if I could get another upside mid-range wide receiver 2, maybe high-end wide receiver 3, plus an upgrade at the running back position, whether that be upgrade by age or upgrade by volume, something like that. I mean, personally, like I know we already talked about Chuba, but I'm a Miles Sanders fan. I don't know how you feel about Miles Sanders, Chu, if it's something that because he signed that 4-year deal last year, and they're upgrading that offensive line. They're upgrading the weapons there. They're trying to get Bryce Young some more, just getting better overall as a team. Like, they're probably going to split a little bit. I don't see, unless they're just going to eat the money that they're paying him. But like Miles would be a guy that I would look to bring back, plus a wide receiver that I could slip right into my starting lineup most of the year too.
Yeah. I mean, the Miles Sanders debate is an interesting one. Chu, would you rather have Miles Sanders or a 2025 third?
It's sad that I have to even think about this. The tricky thing is, the contract is the biggest thing. I know, of course, at a minimum, keeps him in Carolina this year. I do think with how everything is going with with it being the coach, the staff, the GM, and everything, it's a complete overhaul. I would like to believe that the owner has somewhat learned from his mistakes, but I'm waiting for halfway through the season where he just throws a drink on somebody and fires everybody again. So, I mean, if I could, I would instead probably be like, hey, can you give me that future third and even another, maybe even less likely piece that's going to work out? But I don't know. I want Miles Sanders to work out, but with a new regime, do they leave it wide open and say, hey, whichever one of you gets the lead role between Hubbard and Sanders, just have at it and we'll figure it out? I do think it's Hubbard's job necessarily, but Sanders did well behind a tremendous O-line in Philly, and I hope he could recreate that, but I don't have the hope. I wish I did.
Yeah. But the fact that was a debate kind of tells you that he's a very, very low cost bet. If you have those, if you're on the clock at the 404 and you don't want anyone, trade for Miles Sanders and take that gamble. But we've talked about a lot of specifics and a lot of more. Sorry, I saw that comment from Jamie about good trade there. I could see both ways, Love or having the 2 stud receivers. But we've talked about specifics. We've talked about the direction of this team. Rice is a younger player. I could see selling him for value. I could see building on him as a cornerstone. What would you think, Chu, about players like Jonathan Taylor and Stephon Diggs? 2, higher end assets in terms of production. Timeline isn't as long as Waddle, Stroud, Rice, who are the cornerstones on that team. What are you doing with say a Jonathan Taylor or a Stephon Diggs in this situation?
For both of them, I know Jonathan Taylor just getting his deal. I have Anthony Richardson coming back and healthy, who love Anthony Richardson. I really want to see a healthy season out of him. We got to see flashes of it, and I don't think any of it was just was limited sample size, and he can't do that on a full season. He's tremendous, but uh, between he and Diggs, I know Diggs had a bit of a down year, and with some of the shuffling going on in Buffalo, with it now being what Diggs, Khalil Shakur, and Curtis Samuel, you know, Diggs already being 30 years old. Surprisingly, I can't believe I feel old just knowing that, but I don't know what you can like where this team's at. I don't know what you can get. Like, would you want to move off of either of those guys that would make any sense? That would be either, if you're trying to tear off of Diggs and you're getting a pick and say another receiver who's some kind of an upside guy. It's like he's kind of at that point where it's like I'd rather trust a bit of a bounce back from Diggs, closer to his form from a year or two ago than I would try to trade off of him and just watch that happen. And with Jonathan Taylor again, last year was a bit of a weird one. His contract dispute and everything. I think it's going to get back to form. So I'd probably hold on to both of those guys. And outside of an injury, I don't know how their values can just absolutely tank, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think arguably, not to push back a little bit, with Diggs at the age and you know how we are in this game of dynasty with players as soon as they hit 30, they turn to dust. Running backs, that's one ACL tear and value is cratered. Jerry, would you trade Jonathan Taylor for a Brandon Ayuk or the 106 for a Rome Odunze plus maybe a little bit on? Would you try to make a trade like that with this team?
No, on this team, I would try to keep Jonathan Taylor. Again, running backs are they're low.
That's true. Scarcity on this team.
I would be looking to trade Diggs though. And obviously I got the Bills behind me. If you just paid attention to the moves they've had to make just to get to the cap, the off season, and I mean, we even had it just a couple weeks ago with our left tackle Dawson, or not Dawson. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. All right, I'm just drawing a blank because, but our left tackle was sending out cryptic messages about I guess this is it, or see you later. And then all of a sudden, like a couple hours later, he's signing he's re-upping his contract. And just getting just helping the cap a little bit more. And he's like, just kidding, I'm going to be in Buffalo for life, blah, blah, blah. The same kind of stuff is going on with Diggs, but that's been going on for the past 3-4 years. And obviously going into January and losing to Cincy and losing into Kansas City and just not getting over that hump, you could just kind of see the frustration in Diggs. And so if this is a team that isn't really ready to make that jump and win the league this year, I'd be looking to get off of him, because you might not get much for him next year when he's maybe a cap casualty because he doesn't want to take a pay cut, and then he ends up signing with Cleveland or something like that. So I would try to get rid of him for good value, though. I mean, I'm not just trying to sell him for nothing, but I would definitely try to look and see if any of the top end guys in my league need a wide receiver or want an older wide receiver and can give me a nice package, a nice haul in return for him.
Yeah. Can you go to the team who lost in the semifinals, for example? It's got, the 108, I guess the 108 in this league because it's 10 team. Do they need a few more pieces to take the next step? Can you send both Diggs and Eckler for the 108? Can you do something like that? That might be a good way to tear down in age at least and still get a Brian Thomas Jr. at that pick. Chu, I do want to come back to you, especially because you mentioned we like to play Dynasty on the extremes. You either want to be aiming for the top of the league or the bottom of the league, which is the top of the draft. Do you adjust your thinking at all, given what we know about the rules of this league? 10 team, 9 starters, 6 teams make the playoffs. Is there an incentive to almost stay in a position where you can make the playoffs and go on a run, or are you not kind of deviating from your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the beauty of that is, there's if over half the league is making it into the playoffs, depending on how the season shakes out, you can see probably like even a third way through the season and kind of see how things are maybe lining up, likely outside of crazy injuries. I could see myself, going up or down, up 2 spots, probably maybe fall back one, but this one guy is easily last. Like everyone would have to just drop all their players to fall to 10th. So like that kind of wipes out that spot. So the fact that 6 of the people are making the playoffs, I have seen plenty of times where in 4 teams making the playoffs, that 4th team makes it, and they're not the one you'd expect to actually win it all, but because of some misfortune in week 17, and they stumble in there and they win it. So if you make the playoffs and you have enough pieces, it can just work out for you. Sometimes a lot of fantasy football is just dumb luck, but I would think where this team's at, I don't think it'll take too many weeks to kind of see some of these guys that we're talking about, especially some of the veteran guys. If you didn't make any moves necessarily, how are they looking? Do you immediately get some injuries like Eckler's already made a glass, and D-Hop and Ridley can't figure it out with Levis? Like some of these guys where it's like, oh, I really need things to work out for the next couple of weeks to even make the playoffs. At that point, you can really lean into, I don't give a crap about this stuff. Like I need to push towards the back of the league. I don't want to make the playoffs. And then you can really hold on to the Strouds and these younger players, and then get rid of Diggs, get rid of, whoever you need to just get yourself ready for next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what about you, Jerry? Would you be, pushing metaphorically pushing the chips in for another run? I mean, this team doesn't have a first in 2024. Is it better to kind of, keep the JTs, keep the Diggs, try and see what you can get out of the rest of the pieces, and then, pivot if you start 2-5 and aim for the 2025 draft? Or what do you think which direction do you think you would take?
I mean, I'm not against doing that, but if you're doing that, then you gotta be paying attention. You gotta be aggressive before the trade deadline happens. And not be worried about like moving on from somebody like Jonathan Taylor or Rashee Rice if you get a killer deal that you just can't pass up. Like you can't don't fall in love with the players and move on from them if the right time comes. But I mean, with it being 6 teams in a 10-team league that make the playoffs, you really can just coast and not be the bottom 4. But you don't want to like handicap yourself going into 2025 if you're just like you're making it into the playoffs at like 7 or how many games are there, like 6 and 8 or whatever.
You could make it at 6 and 8,
making it at 6 and 8, and then just like getting smoked in the first round because you're not paying attention. So like if you're gonna do it that way, if you're not gonna sell off pieces in the off season, you definitely got to pay more attention and see what you can get in season from the competing guys, and then try to just that way you're not giving yourself like a 3-year rebuild, and you could try to compete in 2025.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shu.
And one thing I was thinking about, since it is 6 teams making the playoffs, you can't control what other teams do. It could be plenty of other teams that are kind of at that like 5th, 6th, 7th spot all choose to just try to fall back to the 10th. But the hope would be there's enough that are pushing to just make the playoffs and they believe in themselves foolishly. So hopefully there's enough of those teams that are like, I just need that one piece to really fill this roster out, or like I need these 2 guys here. So I'm hoping that if it doesn't work out and you kind of see the writing on the wall before these other people do, you should be able to maybe have a couple more suitors than if it was just a 4 teams making the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, teams might think that a Pollard or Eckler just is going to take them over the edge a little bit, especially when you don't have to be that great to get into the playoffs. So definitely, I think a lot of trading is knowing your league, knowing the teams you're playing with. Our teams, do players play with a little bit more of a redraft mentality? Do they want Pollard a little more than some of the rest of us might want him? So there's a lot to think about. I think the pieces are there. So hopefully we were able to help you out there, Jack. Thank you for submitting your team. We'll give a quick second. People in the chat, any remaining questions about free agency? I know we covered a lot and bounced from side to side. Jamie and hopefully Jeff is still around, as well as everyone else. If not, Thank you all for watching. Jerry, tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Jerry Wilkie FM, or you can just search Jerry Wilkie on Facebook. If you need to get a hold of me, just slide into the DMs. We are on every other Thursday at 9:30 live, so we can take your questions, and you could hit up our Discord too, the Going for Two Discord.
Yeah. Perfect. And what about you, Chu?
Yeah, check me out on Twitter and on YouTube at Father Dynasty. Got the writing over at Going for Two, of course. And yeah, keep coming back every 2 weeks for the fantasy assessment. And of course, the many other things in Going for Two Live.
Yes, sir. That was a good point. Fantasy assessment every other Thursday. And I was Rahul. You can find me at I'm still Rahul, but you can find me on Twitter at nrahul11. And on here, Going for Two Live. A lot of great shows all week. So definitely do tune in. A lot of good talk going around. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch you next time.